My name is Rachel Moore. I'm 26 years old, and this story begins on a Saturday afternoon I thought would be ordinary. I had gone to the jewelry store with my sister, believing it would just be another quiet errand. But in less than a minute, everything changed. Her hand struck my face, the sound echoing so loud it silenced the entire store. That moment shattered not just the room, but something deep inside me, and I knew I could never look at her the same way again. White right pointing backhand index. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. The first sting wasn't on my skin, it was in my chest. The slap echoed so sharply against the glass cases that even the store's soft background music seemed to pause. For a split second, I couldn't breathe. I touched my cheek with trembling fingers, stunned at the warmth rising on my skin. All around me, strangers froze. A mother held her child's hand a little tighter, her eyes wide. A young couple shopping for an engagement ring stood awkwardly, whispering behind their hands. The store clerk, who had been smiling politely at me just seconds earlier, dropped his gaze to the counter as if wishing to disappear. But my sister, Laura, didn't flinch. Her chest rose and fell sharply, her jaw clenched, and her voice rang louder than the slap. "You'll always be a shadow," she spat, the word slicing through me like a blade. The nickname wasn't new. It was an old wound reopened, one she'd carved into me back when we were kids. And hearing it here, in front of strangers, was worse than the sting on my cheek. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. "Why would you do that?" I asked, my voice shaking. Laura crossed her arms, her chin tilted high. "Because you think you're special," she sneered. "Look at you. Staff rushing to save you, offering you VIP treatment like you matter more than anyone else." The truth was simpler. The sales clerk had simply recognized me. I'd bought a necklace from the store before, and he'd remembered my name. But Laura didn't see it that way. To her, my recognition was proof that I was stealing the spotlight she believed belonged to her. For a moment, I thought about walking out, about ending it before it escalated further. But my legs refused to move. I stood frozen, humiliated under the fluorescent lights, every eye in the store glued to us. The clerk coughed nervously and tried to regain control of the moment. "Ladies, perhaps we could." "Stay out of it," Laura snapped, her tone sharp enough to silence him instantly. Her anger wasn't just about today. It was years of bottled resentment spilling out. She had always hated when I received even a shred of attention. Family gatherings, school events, birthdays, every time someone noticed me, Laura would find a way to cut me down. And here we were again. Only this time, she'd chosen a public stage. My heart pounded as if it wanted to leap from my chest. I could taste metal at the back of my mouth, a mix of fear and rage. "You embarrassed yourself," I whispered, hoping my words wouldn't shake. Laura's laugh was cruel. "No, Rachel, I embarrassed you." Her words were daggers. And yet, what hurt more than her cruelty was the realization that no one was stepping in. People stared, some clearly disturbed, but everyone stayed rooted in place, unwilling to get involved. The isolation was suffocating. Suddenly, a small hand tugged at my sleeve. I turned and saw the little girl who had been holding her mother's hand. Her wide brown eyes looked up at me, filled with concern. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. The question nearly broke me. I forced a shaky smile and nodded. "I'll be fine, sweetheart." Her mother quickly pulled her back, muttering an apology, but the child's innocence lingered in my mind. It reminded me how unnatural this moment was. Siblings weren't supposed to hold each other this way, especially not in public. Laura, however, seemed to grow more confident in the silence that followed. She leaned closer, her voice low enough for only me to hear. "They're all watching, Rachel, and they can see what you really are, nothing but my shadow." The words struck deeper than the slap. My chest tightened, and memories flashed uninvited. Laura pushing me aside in a school play so she could take center stage, mocking me at family dinners, rolling her eyes whenever I spoke. I had spent most of my life shrinking to keep the peace. But in that moment, under the harsh lights of the jewelry store, shrinking felt impossible. I straightened my back, even though my hands still trembled. "You don't get to define me anymore," I said quietly. She blinked, caught off guard by my firmness. Before she could reply, the store door chimed with the sound of someone entering. Heads turned. I didn't know then that the next few moments would alter everything. But for now, it was just me, standing in the middle of that jewelry store with my cheeks still burning, the echoes of a slap hanging heavy in the air, and the weight of an entire room pressing down on me. And deep inside, something shifted. For the first time in years, I felt the faint spark of resolve, a quiet refusal to remain anyone's shadow. The weight of that moment didn't fade when I left the jewelry store. If anything, it pressed harder against my chest as I stepped outside. The cool air hit my burning cheek, but it couldn't calm the storm swirling inside me. Laura's words, shadow, looped in my mind like a cruel chant. It wasn't just an insult. It was history, dragged out of the darkness and thrown at me in front of strangers. And the truth was, it had always been there. That word had lived with me longer than most memories. When I was 8 and Laura was 10, she came up with the nickname. She was standing on the porch with a group of neighborhood kids, her hand clutching a popsicle that dripped down her wrist. I had followed her outside, as I always did. "Why are you everywhere I go?" she whined loudly enough for the other kids to hear. "You're like a shadow, always behind me, never your own person." The kids laughed. I remember feeling small, staring at my sandals as their giggles filled the summer air. From that day forward, shadow wasn't just a word. It was my identity in her eyes. At school, Laura was the loud one, the girl who volunteered to sing in front of the class, the one who raised her hand for every answer. Teachers adored her confidence. I was quieter, more reserved, the one who liked to draw in the back of my notebook. Whenever someone noticed me, Laura would cut in with, "Don't be fooled. She's just my shadow." I'd laugh it off sometimes, pretending it didn't matter. But when I lay in bed at night, staring at the glow-in-the-dark stars on my ceiling, I wondered if maybe she was right. Maybe I was nothing more than a reflection of her, present but unnoticed. One memory stood out sharper than the rest. Middle school talent show. I had practiced for weeks on a piano piece, nervous but excited. The moment I walked on stage, Laura, sitting in the front row with her friends, cupped her hands around her mouth and yelled, "Go, Shadow!" The crowd chuckled, and my hand shook so badly I missed the first few notes. By the time I finished, I could barely look up. At home afterward, Mom tried to soothe me. She didn't mean it, Rachel. That's just how siblings are. Dad chuckled, adding, "You two will laugh about this when you're older." But I never laughed. And judging by the way Laura's smirk lingered that night, she had meant every word. The years rolled on, but the pattern never changed. Birthday parties, school dances, graduations, any moment that might have been mine was interrupted by her commentary. The worst part wasn't just Laura's cruelty. It was how normal it became to everyone else. Family brushed it off as sibling rivalry, friends shrugged it away, teachers ignored it. And so, the word shadow carved itself deeper into me, like it belonged. I tried to escape it in small ways. I joined the art club in high school, pouring myself into charcoal drawings. I thought maybe if I created something beautiful, people would finally see me, not her version of me. But at the end of year showcase, when a teacher complimented my piece, Laura leaned over with her saccharine smile and said, "Well, of course she draws. Shadows don't talk much." Laughter again. Always laughter. Standing on the sidewalk outside the jewelry store years later, I felt every one of those memories crash over me. My chest tightened until it hurt. The present and the past blurred together. Her slap, just another strike in a long line of them, only louder, harder, and public. I leaned against the brick wall, trying to steady my breath. My phone buzzed in my purse, and for a second I considered calling Mom. But what would I even say? She'd probably tell me to let it go, that Laura didn't mean it. She always said that. Maybe she believed it, maybe she didn't. Either way, it left me carrying the weight alone. A couple walked past me, glancing briefly before looking away. I realized then how visible my pain must look, written all over my face. I straightened, wiping the corner of my eye quickly, refusing to let strangers see me cry. "Are you okay?" a voice asked gently. I turned to see the sales clerk from the store. He stood in the doorway, awkward but concerned. I shouldn't ask, but you didn't deserve that." His words nearly undid me. I forced a nod. "I'm fine." He hesitated, as if wanting to say more, then stepped back inside. Alone again, I started walking. My footsteps echoed against the pavement, each step pulling me deeper into old memories I wished I could bury. I remember the Christmas when Laura unwrapped a pair of earrings and gasped in delight, only to glance at me and say, "Guess shadows don't get shiny things." I remembered the family road trip where she claimed the front seat every time, announcing, "Rachel's fine in the back. Shadows follow anyway." These weren't just jokes. They were bricks stacked on top of me until I could hardly breathe. And yet, I had carried them quietly for years. By the time I reached my car, my hands were shaking again. I gripped the steering wheel tightly, the leather cold beneath my palms. My reflection in the rearview mirror startled me. My cheeks still flushed from the slap, my eyes rimmed red, but it wasn't just the pain that unsettled me. It was the question gnawing at me. Why had I allowed her words to define me for so long? The answer came slowly, a painful truth I had always avoided, because everyone else allowed it too. Because it was easier to keep the peace than to challenge her. Because I had believed if I stayed quiet, someday she might stop. But she never stopped. And maybe she never would. I let my forehead rest against the steering wheel. For a long moment, I just breathed, in and out, the air heavy and sharp in my lungs. Shadows of the past weren't easy to escape. They followed, lingered, whispered. But for the first time, I felt a flicker of something different. Not just pain, but a quiet, stubborn spark that refused to die. Laura's voice still echoed in my head, cruel and certain. But another voice was rising, quieter yet stronger. My own. And for the first time in years, I was listening. The next time I stepped back inside the jewelry store, the air felt heavier than it had moments before. My cheeks still throbbed faintly, though by now the sting had dulled into a strange heat that seemed to radiate across my face. I hadn't planned on re-entering so quickly, but something in me refused to leave unfinished business behind. The moment the door closed behind me, the quiet hit me. Not the soft, comfortable quiet of background music and hushed conversations, but a sharp, unnatural silence, like the entire room was holding its breath. Every eye turned toward me. Shoppers who had drifted between glass cases were suddenly still. The young couple by the engagement rings stood frozen, the hands hovering over the velvet trays as if afraid to move. Even the clerk at the counter, who had been adjusting a necklace, stopped mid-motion. It wasn't just attention. It was scrutiny, a collective unease that wrapped around me like a net. Laura was still there, standing stiffly near the display we'd argued over earlier. Her arms were crossed tightly against her chest, her chin tilted just a little too high, as if the posture itself could erase the fact that she had struck me minutes earlier. But her eyes betrayed her. They darted around, flickering with unease every time someone glanced in her direction. For the first time in years, she didn't look untouchable. She looked cornered. A woman in a navy blazer whispered to her husband, her voice sharp despite the attempt to keep it low. "Did you see that?" She slapped her own sister. The words weren't meant for me, but I heard them anyway. They sliced through the silence, hanging in the air long enough for everyone to register. Laura's shoulders tensed, and her lips pressed into a thin line. I felt my throat tighten. My instinct was to shrink, to lower my head and let the ground swallow me. That's what I'd always done, absorb the shame so Laura could keep her image intact. But standing there, surrounded by strangers who had witnessed the truth, I found myself strangely unwilling to hide. The clerk finally cleared his throat, breaking the tension. His voice wavered as he spoke. Is everything all right here? Laura whipped her head toward him, her tone icy. Mind your business. This is a family matter. The words echoed too loudly in the hushed store. Family matter. How many times had I heard that excuse growing up? Every insult, every jab, every cruel nickname brushed aside with those two words. But hey, in this brightly lit space filled with people who didn't know us, it sounded uglier. The young man by the engagement rings shifted uncomfortably. With all due respect, he muttered, not quite looking up. That didn't look like family. That looked like assault. A collective gasp rippled across the room. My stomach clenched, both from the bluntness of his words and from the sudden spotlight it cast. Laura's eyes blazed, and for a second, I thought she might lash out again. But something stopped her, the awareness that too many witnesses stood watching. Her hand twitched at her side, then curled into a fist, restrained. I took a slow breath, letting the silence stretch until it felt unbearable. Then, softly but firmly, I said, "She's right. This isn't how family should act." My voice surprised me. It didn't shake. It didn't falter. It rang through the tense air like a small but steady bell. Laura turned on me, her glare sharp enough to cut glass. "Don't you dare play the victim here, Rachel." Her words bounced off the walls, too loud, too defensive. I could almost see the shift in the room, the way people began to view her less as the bold sister and more as the aggressor. Eyes narrowed, lips pursed, head shook subtly. Judgment was forming, and it wasn't aimed at me anymore. The clerk took a cautious step forward. If this continues, I'll have to ask you both to leave." Laura scoffed, but I saw her falter. For the first time, someone outside our family was drawing a line she couldn't cross. The silence deepened again, heavier now with unspoken judgment. A woman with silver hair clutched her purse closer, her eyes darting between us like she was bracing for another explosion. A man in a leather jacket tapped his fingers on the glass case, restless, as though itching to intervene but unsure how. I felt my pulse thudding in my ears. My mind spun, weighing my options, step down and let Laura win again, or hold my ground in a way I never had before. Then something shifted. A child's giggle, soft and unexpected, broke through the tension. I looked over and saw the same little girl from earlier, the one who had tugged my sleeve outside. She peeked around her mother's skirt, her wide eyes curious but innocent. Her mother shushed her quickly, but the sound had already cracked the oppressive silence. It reminded me of something simple. This moment wasn't just about me and Laura. It was about the kind of example being set, about what it meant to stand tall when someone tried to make you small. I squared my shoulders. "I'm not your shadow," I said clearly, each word deliberate. The statement hung in the air, sharp and undeniable. A murmur spread through the small crowd, as though the words carried more weight than anyone expected. Laura's face paled slightly, and for once, she had no quick retort ready. The silence that followed wasn't the same suffocating hush as before. It was different now, charged, expectant, the kind that hinted at a shift about to unfold. Every eye stayed locked on us, waiting for what would come next. Laura's lips parted, but no words came. For the first time, the silence didn't belong to her. It belonged to me. The silence clung to the air, thick and unbroken, until the faint creak of the front door cut through it. A man stepped inside, dressed in a worn grey coat that looked a size too big, the collar pulled up as though to shield him from the world. He wasn't like the other shoppers. No polished shoes, no sparkling watch, no distracted scanning of the jewelry cases. He carried himself differently, quiet, deliberate, almost like he had been waiting for this exact moment. His eyes swept the room once, pausing briefly on Laura's rigid stance before settling on me. Something about the way he looked at me, not her, made my chest tighten. He didn't glance away like the others, didn't mask his curiosity with polite indifference. He studied me with a steady gaze, as though he recognized something others had missed. Laura noticed too. She straightened her posture, trying to reclaim authority, but her voice wavered. Can we get back to shopping now? This spectacle has gone on long enough. The clock shifted uneasily, clearly relieved at the idea of moving on, but the man in the grey coat spoke before anyone else could. His tone was calm, measured, yet somehow it carried more weight than Laura's brittle sharpness. Some spectacles, he said, are warnings in themselves. The words landed heavily, and for a moment, I wasn't sure he was even talking to us. But then his gaze locked on mine again, and the room seemed to shrink until it was only the two of us. Laura scoffed, throwing her hand in the air. Oh, fantastic. Now strangers are getting involved. Why don't you mind your own business? The man didn't flinch. If this were only about you, I would. But it isn't. And he gestured subtly toward me, should be careful. A chill spread through me. Careful of what? Careful of Laura? Careful of myself? The ambiguity twisted my stomach. I finally found my voice. What do you mean? He hesitated, his eyes softening, almost apologetic. Not here. Not like this. But you should know, what looks like control often hides something more dangerous. Don't ignore the signs. The murmurs in the store began again, people exchanging puzzled looks. Laura let out a sharp laugh, brittle and too loud. Are you serious? You don't even know us. You waltz in here with your cryptic little speeches and think you can play prophet. But the man didn't rise to her bait. His expression didn't change, though there was a flicker of pity in his eyes when he looked at her. Then he turned back to me, lowering his voice. You've endured more than you should already. Don't give her the chance to take more. The words slid under my skin. Too precise, too knowing. He couldn't possibly understand everything, but somehow he had seen enough to say aloud what I had buried for years. My breath caught. I wanted to demand answers. Who was he? What did he know? Why did he care? But before I could form the words, the clock finally stepped forward, flustered and red-faced. All right, this is enough. If there are going to be accusations and theatrics, I'll have to ask everyone involved to step outside. This is a jewelry store, not a stage. The room stayed, shoppers shifting uncomfortably, eager to escape the tension. The couple by the engagement rings whispered to each other, then quietly slipped out the side door. The older woman with the silver hair muttered something under her breath and followed. Slowly, the crowd thinned, but the man in the grey coat didn't move. Laura grabbed my arm suddenly, her nails digging in just enough to sting. Don't listen to this nonsense, she hissed, her voice sharp but pitched low so only I could hear. He's just some drifter looking for attention. But her grip betrayed her. It wasn't the confident squeeze of someone in control. It was desperate, shaky, almost fearful. I pulled my arm free, meeting her glare with one of my own. Then why does it scare you? Her face drained of color, and for a fleeting second, I saw something raw flicker behind her eyes. Guilt? Fear? Rage? I couldn't tell, but it unsettled me enough to step back. The man in the grey coat tilted his head slightly, as though studying the exchange, then finally took a step closer. His voice, though quiet, carried to every corner of the room. You think silence protects you, he said, addressing me directly. But silence is what people like her count on. Don't let her turn your silence into her shield. The words struck deep, because they weren't about this store, this moment. They were about years of swallowed words, about every time I had bitten back the truth to keep the peace. He had named it, stripped it bare in front of everyone. My throat burned, but not from tears. From something else, something rising that I hadn't let myself feel in a long time. Laura slammed her hand on the glass case, the sharp sound making the clock flinch. That's it. Enough. Who even are you? She demanded. The man's eyes didn't leave mine. Someone who's seen this story before. Then, just as suddenly as he'd appeared, he turned toward the door. No purchase, no further explanation, just the faint jingle of the bell as it closed behind him. For a long moment, I stood rooted in place, the room oddly hollow without him. His words echoed inside me, louder than Laura's protests, louder than the clerk's attempts to smooth things over. A warning. Not a prediction, not a threat, a warning. And though I didn't understand it fully yet, I knew one thing with startling clarity. I would not forget it. The door clicked shut behind him, leaving only the faint chime of the bell to mark his departure. Yet his voice lingered inside me, louder than the murmur of shoppers returning to their browsing, louder than Laura's scathing tone as she tried to reclaim control. Don't let her turn your silence into her shield. Those words pulsed through me like a heartbeat I hadn't noticed before, steady, insistent. I felt them in my chest, in my fingertips, even in the weight of my shoes on the polished tile floor. For the first time in years, I wasn't just enduring Laura's presence. I was measuring it, and it no longer felt immovable. Laura tugged at my sleeve, her voice sharp but unsteady. Are you seriously letting some stranger get in your head? He doesn't know you. He doesn't know us. This is ridiculous. I turned to face her fully. Something inside me had shifted, small but undeniable. Maybe he doesn't know me, I said quietly. But he saw enough. Her mouth opened, then closed again, like she hadn't expected me to answer. Usually, my silence was her safety net. Now it wasn't there. The look that crossed her face, uneasy, almost startled, was worth more than any necklace or polished ring glinting under the glass cases. I stepped back, creating a space between us that felt bigger than the few inches on the store floor. I'm done standing here. The clock, still rattled from the earlier confrontation, tried to smooth things over. If you'd like to continue looking. No, I interrupted, my voice steadier than I felt. I don't need to look anymore. I turned toward the exit, each step heavier than it should have been, as though the air itself resisted my movement. But with every footfall, the resistance thinned. I heard Laura's heels striking the floor behind me, quick and sharp. Don't you dare walk out on me, she hissed, her words clipping the space between us like knives. I paused at the door, my hand resting on the cool metal handle. For a moment, I considered staying, out of habit if nothing else. Then the memory of her nails digging into my arm, the years of her dismissive tone, the way she fed on my silence, pressed against me all at once. I pushed the door open. The late afternoon air rushed over me, crisp and biting, but it tasted like freedom. Outside, the street was alive in ways the store had muted. Car engines hummed, distant conversations drifted from the cafe across the road, and the scent of roasted coffee beans mingled with the faint exhaust of traffic. Everything felt sharper, as though stepping through that doorway had peeled away a layer of haze I hadn't even realized surrounded me. Wait! Laura's voice followed, sharper than the air. She caught up, grabbing my arm again, this time with both hands. You can't just leave me standing in there, looking like some fool. You owe me better than that. I looked down at her hands, then back into her eyes. I don't owe you anything. The words surprised me as much as they did her, but once spoken, they solidified, firm and unshakable. Her grip faltered, her knuckles paling as she tried to hold tighter. After everything I've done for you. No, my voice cut clean through hers. After everything I've allowed you to take. That's over. She blinked, stunned, her lips parting as though to argue, but no sound came. For the first time in years, I saw her not as an immovable shadow, but as a person, flawed, brittle, smaller than she had worked so hard to appear. I gently pulled my arm free. This time, she didn't resist. The city seemed to notice, its rhythm syncing with the decision I had made. A bus rumbled past, brakes screeching at the light, and a boy on a skateboard zipped by with a laugh, unbothered by the tension unraveling between us. Life moved forward, unpausing, unconcerned. And for once, I wanted to move with it. I started walking, not quickly, not dramatically, but with a purpose that felt entirely my own. The pavement echoed beneath my shoes, each step less about escape and more about direction. Behind me, I heard Laura's voice call out once more, thin and breaking. You'll regret this. Maybe I would. Maybe I wouldn't. But regret, I realized, was lighter than the weight of staying in her shadow. I didn't turn back. As I reached the corner, the cafe door swung open, and the rich scent of espresso washed over me. The stranger wasn't there. He was gone, vanished into the pulse of the city, but his warning lived inside me, guiding each step. I slipped into the cafe, not for coffee, but for space. The chatter, the clink of cups, the hum of casual laughter wrapped around me, cushioning the raw edge of the confrontation. I found a small table by the window and sat, my hands trembling only now that I was alone. For a long while, I watched the people pass outside. Some walked briskly, others lingered, couples, friends, strangers, all carrying their own burdens and freedoms. For the first time, I wondered what I might look like to them, a woman sitting by a window, pale and shaken, but no longer chained to someone else's shadow. I traced the rim of the empty coffee cup left behind by the last customer, feeling its smoothness beneath my fingers. Slowly, a thought unfurled, fragile, but alive. Maybe walking out wasn't just leaving Laura behind. Maybe it was stepping into myself. When I finally rose from the table, the tremble in my hands had steadied. I pushed open the cafe door and stepped back onto the street. The air was still sharp, the noise still constant, but it no longer overwhelmed me. It welcomed me. This time, I didn't look back at all.